Gucci, whatever the price.
The Honorable Deputy Speaker.
We have a forum and
Honourable members, as we resume after tea, I recognize the member for Caroni East. You have 3 minutes of your initial speaking time to complete, and you have your additional 15 minutes. You care to avail yourself one time? Yes. Right, so kindly proceed. You have a total of 18 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, before we took the tea break, there were a number of issues which continue to worry me in terms of, and worry us on this side, about statements made by the Prime Minister, the member for Diego Martin West. And I wanted to refer, he spoke about the appointment of Commissioner of Police. I want to tell this country that we must go back with those of us who would remember the past when, in the Prime Minister Manning's administration, he called a meeting with the opposition, led by Mr. Pandey at the time, and our present leader of the opposition was a member of the team that met with Mr. Manning's team. And under that, there were 3 pieces of legislation that were amended: the Constitution Amendment Bill, the Police Complaints Authority, and the Police Service Bill. And there was a huge outcry as to why a Prime Minister must be able to veto the appointment of a Commissioner of Police. And both sides agreed. Yeah.
Member,
yeah.
Again, it was mentioned, yes, but the length of time in order to go into, tying your point quickly, as with regards to relevance, please. Right, but I'm giving you to go on, but in terms of, bringing it in, yeah.
All I want to say that there was an appointment of Commissioner of Police under their administration, and the present Minister of Finance went on for almost an hour and 15 minutes to say why they didn't want that Commissioner of Police, when that Commissioner of Police was appointed with the due process.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48-1, the Minister of Finance never spoke today about a Commissioner of Police. Where are we going with this? The Prime Minister spoke en passant.
Okay, member. Proceed. I will be.
I'm sorry, the member of Parliament for St. Joseph is a new person in this, and he doesn't remember the history of politics in Trinidad. But there was a process here to appoint the Commissioner of Police again, and the PNM found it.
Deputy Speaker, again, 48-1. This again, we are good about a Commissioner of Police. It was mentioned en passant.
Fine. Okay, member. And yes, I've overruled, and I'm saying proceed, tie it in. I'm giving you the opportunity to tie in the point.
Whenever there is appointment of a police commissioner that they do not want, they decide that they're going to scuttle the entire process. And that is why we are here today without a commissioner of police, and we are being blamed for it. But the blame lies on the PNM shoulders. When the Prime Minister says, we don't want this country to succeed, all of us here are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We are patriots. We want every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago to enjoy the prosperity which is due to them. We want to ensure that their lives are secure. We want to ensure the good health, good education, good economic development, and for the benefit of all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is why the people are not seeing that happening at this time, and they feel deflated. They feel they have made mistakes in voting in this administration, and they feel sad about themselves for doing so. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to ask some questions related directly to the bill itself in terms of the Minister of Finance must answer who determines the share value of each one of these shares that is going to come from CIB, CLICO, the TGU, WITCO, and the fifth one is OCM and I don't think they put in Angostura. So on what basis these shares are going to be valued? Is it the market share of Republic Bank? Or is it the market share of OCM? And what about those companies that are not on the stock exchange? Who is going to determine the share value? We hear them speak about it has gone through a rigorous process and so on, but it has not been made clear to us, to the country, on what basis these shares are going to be valued at what dollar value. We know that certain stocks are being traded on the stock exchange now, and we know what is the present value. Some of these shares, some of these companies that they have included in this process don't have a share value at the moment. So we want to ask from this side, how is it that they're going to determine what is the share value of all these companies that are being included? Republic Financial Holding Limited, he said he's going to get 4.3 billion, which is 55% of the shares invested. WITCO 5%, OCM 2%, which is 200 million, Angostura 970 million, which is 12% of the National Investment Fund, and TGU 2 billion, which is 26% of assets. I took down the notes while he was speaking. From what I gather, this comes up to approximately $7.5 billion. Something is missing for the other $0.5 billion. We don't know which company is being part of it again, and how are they going to derive that other $0.5 billion or $500 million for this portfolio of $8 billion. Because they want to float to $8 billion, they want to generate $8 billion in income, and 49% of that will be in the stock market, and so they will have $4 billion. But something is not adding up, and therefore the minister or whoever responds should give some answers to that issue. The minister said that they use a strategic approach to determination of for the bringing about this National Investment Fund Holding Company Limited. And in our time, you know, when we said that we met $23 billion in debt owed to shareholders, we generated and received about $8 billion during our time, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So we were able to get about $8 billion on the work that we did as a government, and $15 billion was still outstanding, and we had various rationale and objectives and processes to follow where we could have got this $15 billion without going into liquidation, sending this company into liquidation. And permit me to quote an answer from a minister in the Ministry of Finance in a question in the other place. I think it was the 13th of March 2018 by Minister Alison West, when she said, and she confirmed, that we had a repayment of $7.486 billion from the People's Partnership Government to the $23 billion that we had to spend, and 15.609 had to be received again. Now, she took due note, the member of the minister in the Ministry of Finance said, and I want to quote, I want to make the point is they did not need to go this way to confront the shareholders and mash up an indigenous and one of the first companies in the Caribbean that went worldwide, one of the first companies from Trinidad and Tobago. And here she admits that. It took due note that the CLF group operated in many sectors throughout Trinidad and Tobago, as well as in extra-regional jurisdictions. The group encompasses companies involved in financial services. This is the width of this company that they have put into liquidation. Alcohol manufacturing, land and property development, retail, energy, and media. The group owned or controlled over 30 companies and numerous additional subsidiaries under many of those companies located in the Caribbean, USA, Europe, and the Middle East. I'm quoting from the minister. Unquote now. That is the might of that group, which has now been sadly sent into liquidation, and the damaging of an indigenous international company with tremendous potential. Why would you take that away from them? Why would you not sit with them, discuss the issue, and come to an amicable settlement, rather than being high-handed, going to the court, liquidate it, going in fire sale, not being able to retrieve the real value of the assets that you're putting there. And I continue to quote, the group owned or controlled over 30 companies, I said that already. These shareholders include Angostura Limited, Home Construction Limited, Methanol Holdings Limited, Republic Finance Holdings, Equities in Colonial Life and General Insurance, Caribbean Petrochemical Manufacturing, LG Williams and Company, One Caribbean Media, Whitco Trinidad, as well as real estate assets. All these were owned by the CLICO Group, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And so you have disassembled the might of a company that had tremendous potential and had many cash cows that bringing in money and return on value of investment. Methanol, Republic Bank, TGU, all of these companies, Home Construction, Colonial Life, all of these were bringing in substantial amount of money in dividends that was assisting in the tax collection for Trinidad and Tobago. All these now are now put into liquidation, and you're depending on the dividends, 400 million a year from the sale of these assets, which is a far cry from what these companies under CLICO would have been generating for Trinidad and Tobago, close to about $3 billion per year. And the minister spoke about, while GORTT, that is the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, considers the repayment of the debt owed by CLF, CLICO, and CIB to be critically important, and envisages that the joint liquidators of CLF would collaborate with the central bank to ensure that the assets are monetized in the best interests of creditors. And this is what the Member of Parliament for Caroni Central was asking. We want the interests of the creditors to be dealt with in an open and transparent manner. And that is not being answered at the moment. The minister said the government has agreed that the NIF would be a closed-ended investment fund based on a trust deed, and into which fund would be placed shares in the various companies. Okay. So, which strategic approach you use? You had the CLICO Investment Fund, CIF, available. You had NEL available with a number of companies in it. And the minister spoke about the rationale for this approach. But it's not a satisfactory rationale. Why would you not have gone in NEL to add the companies to NEL? You haven't answered that. And you spoke about that is the solution to it, to form a new company, put these companies under this new national investment funding, new national investment fund holding company, and start afresh in the stock market. He has admitted that the Securities and Exchange Commission are still looking at this matter. He said that this prospectus will be put on the market between July 11th and August 8th. No, you said so. You said so. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance said that the prospectus will be open in July 4th, July 11th, and closed in August 8th. When the Securities and Exchange Commission has not completed its work, how are you going to put that prospectus onto the market for people to now begin to look at investment in it? So that's one. Secondly, he wasn't sure about there was a area that he was not sure about, and I will come to that now. No. He said that this company will have to pay business levy. Sure. But there was another area that he was unsure about whether they will have to pay it or not. And so therefore he's coming to Parliament, telling us to approve something, and he himself is unsure whether this company has to pay any under that other situation. We are clear on the business levy has to be paid. But there was another situation which he was not clear about, Mr. Speaker. So he himself is in doubt of whether this will happen. You remember they promised this, that by this day, before the end of June, this National Insurance Fund holding company will come into effect. This will not be completed in this fiscal year. So the money will
Silence
not be
on both sides.
The money will not be generated for the $4 billion that he's expecting to be generated to clear the deficit in fiscal 2018. And that's a far cry from what is really happening. Who are the expert consultants that they speak about? Does the country know who are these expert consultants who have given them advice on this? Who are the advisors? The Minister of Finance haven't given any clarity on this. And this is what the members, my colleague from Caroni Central had been asking as well. So the value of the shares is not, there's no clarity on it. What expert advice have they gotten or have they received? And who gave this expert advice? And the whole question of the monetization is bad. It's bad policy, because the people, we know that the people will not go to purchase these bonds on the market, particularly the poor people. So when they said that they're going to open this to the wider community and the wider society, when a poor man...
Minister of Finance, you will have your opportunity in wrapping up to answer all the concerns. Member for Caroni East, you have 3 more minutes.
I want to close by indicating that this approach that the government has taken into carrying this company into liquidation is a very sad approach, and it is something that has to be looked into and explored very carefully. Why did this happen? And I want to ascribe the blame to the Minister of Finance, because he was unable to deal with the existing shareholders. There are questions that he still has to answer. How are they going to monetize this $4 billion that they're looking for? We say that we want to wish them well on it, but we believe from the perspective of what is happening in this country at the moment, when people are suffering and they have lost confidence in this government, they will not realize that $4 billion. So when they believe that they're opening up the market for the poor person, that is a far cry from what is reality, because people are not interested in investment at this moment. People are interested in probably moving out of this country. People are not buying homes. They're not investing in anything. So I wish them well. If they realize that, that is good. But we want to tell them that we believe that that is far from reality. So, Mr. Speaker, when they make the statement that we do not want to support them, it's a matter of analyzing the entire situation, searching for answers in certain areas, not getting the answers. We remain baffled by a number of secrets that are still held inside there. And so, therefore, we search for these answers. We want some of the answers to be given to the opposition, which is the legitimate opposition representing the voices of over 345,000 people, and it is incumbent upon the government and the Minister of Finance to provide the answers through us to the general population. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member for Port of Spain West, Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you very much. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just to bring things back into a solemn context and also a realm of reality. First of all, the bill that we have before us today, as the Minister of Finance has said, is really one clause. What we're asking the Parliament and our colleagues all around today to agree to is to allow a structure that I'll describe some level of detail coming after the Minister of Finance and the Honourable Prime Minister, to allow these bonds. That's the first point. What it is the government is offering bonds. So what we're here today to do is to have these bonds declared as tax-free bonds, and that the profits made by the assets that are backing these bonds also be tax-free, and that the interest payable on the bonds be tax-free. So it's those two elements. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've heard a lot of rewriting, I think, of history here today. So just to put it back in context, in 2009, the then experts, the central bank, etc., on doing an analysis, came to the then government and said that this empire that we've just heard Carney East describe, the Clico CLF empire, was in great distress. And if the government didn't bail it out, it would have serious ripple effects in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. That is history. At the end of the day, a decision was taken in early 2009 to provide a bailout for privately owned companies. These were not state-owned companies. As my friend from Carney East told us, they then appointed a commission of inquiry when they were in power. It went on for months, and we heard all manners of evidence come forward in that commission of inquiry as to the mismanagement of this empire, as they put it, which led to this over $23 billion strain on the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago. What needs to be understood is that before the then Manning-led administration could have dealt with what was taking place and the state of Clico and CLF, an election took place. And to remind the population that from May 2010 until September 2015, 5 years and 3 months as compared to just a little bit over 1 year, those on the other side were in charge of this whole CLF and Clico debacle. And what we came in and found as an administration is during that period of time, they had 15 extensions of an agreement with the shareholders of CLF. 15 extensions. And no matter how much they talk, no matter how much noise they make, no matter how they beat their chests as to what they did, the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and the taxpayers were owed over $23 billion by these private shareholders. And during that 5-year and 3-month period, they did not get any security over that debt. So for the citizens to understand what they faced and the jeopardy and the risk that they face, they were owed, we as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago were owed, and it is actually closer to $25 billion by the shareholders of the CLF empire, and we did not have any security over it once that agreement wasn't re-signed. So during that 5-year and 3-month period, they never got any security over the assets of CLF and Clico. And what happened next? They saw a change in administration. It has nothing, and I want to correct the record, it has nothing to do with the Honorable Minister of Finance not wanting to talk to them, because that is completely untrue. He came in as the Minister of Finance, sat down with them and said, let us start to deal with the repayment of this debt. And what did they do? They filed notices calling for a special meeting to outnumber the government board members and refused to sign an agreement. So once again, why? Because they saw an opportunity based on the weakness of the 5 years and 3 months to now try and grab those assets back from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And nothing was done. And furthermore, let's talk about what they did with the RBL shares and we discovered when we came in. Because I'm going to talk about RBL and what we heard Carney Central talk about RBL. Because what Carney Central talked about RBL, I was sitting on a plane about to return from Australia via Los Angeles. And all of a sudden started to get messages on my phone that were in the exact same language that the member for Carney Central used for RBL. But I'll come to that shortly. I want the country to understand something. This bank called Republic Bank Limited cut a deal with that administration when they formed something called the CIF. The CIF is the Clico Investment Fund, where they put a set of Republic Bank shares into a trust. And that government cut a deal with the directors of Republic Bank that they would not touch the voting rights of those shares. So over 25% of Republic Bank shares were put in a trust to back bonds for them to bail out policyholders, which was a good thing for policyholders. The question that we asked when we came in is, why did they enter into a deal with RBL directors? Because it's not the RBL shareholders, but the directors not to vote on those shares. Is it to protect empires? Is it to protect persons who sit down on the board and have a comfortable lifestyle and think that they're protected and they can dictate what they want to do? That's the first question. So when we came in, these same shareholders refused to sign an extension of the Memorandum of Understanding with the government and then moved aggressively, being advised by embarrassingly former PNM ministers, moved aggressively to take away the assets from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Not to take away the assets from PNM, not to take away the assets from those on the other side, but to take away the assets from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And that is what the Dupre-led shareholders sought to do. So what is our government supposed to do in those circumstances, where we're asking them to do the right thing, sign an extension for the 17th time, and let us work out a liquidation of the assets? What did they do? They filed notices under wrong advice in law, rushed to try and call a special meeting to add 2 additional directors to boot out the government. This government took on that fight and succeeded in the courts for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And it is this government that is the first time an administration since 2009 is finally able to start the liquidation of the assets. There is no fire sale. There's a court-appointed process. There's a process in law how those assets will be liquidated. And every single asset is being properly evaluated. So let's come now to the NIF. As I hear them say that's the same thing. They always become uncomfortable. The assets that are backing the NIF, and this is to correct the misinformation, or rather the question being asked, how do you value the assets? The Minister of Finance has said what the assets are. RBL shares, you could open a newspaper today and tell the people what is the value of RBL shares, because it's a publicly traded company. You could do the same thing for OCM, you could do the same thing for Whitco, you could do the same thing for Angostura if Angostura was to be put in. The next point is TGU, there are professional valuators that will value TGU. So every single share that is being put into this fund to back the bonds is properly valued. There's no fire sale to it. Absolutely no fire sale. So that is misinformation. The second point on that is, we've heard this big hoorah. All of a sudden, we heard the member for Carney Central come using, as I said a short while ago, identical language to language that certain RBL directors are trying to use all over the place. And as you heard the Prime Minister say, trying to reach out to half of the cabinet to persuade us not to do this deal, that the government, for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, must not take over 10% of RBL shares. Well, we're not listening to that, because this government will not be bullied, will not be intimidated, and we will do what is right for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So the RBL shares are going into the NIF. We are not cutting any deal with any board member of RBL. or any person who thinks they control RBL to say that we're not going to put members on the board or we're not going to have voting rights. Absolutely not. To get to the policy of this SIF, and I think this is important for the people of Trinidad and Tobago to understand, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You see, the budget has been in deficit since 2010 and before. So when you have a deficit, what it means is you have more expenditure than you have revenue and you have to close it. You can do it by borrowing or selling of assets. When you sell assets in the way that we saw with the sale of the IPO of FCB, the IPO of Point Lisa's Nitrogen, it just disappears when you use those assets. The money you get from the sale of the assets, you put it towards recurrent expenditure, it disappears. It takes over $1 billion a week to run Trinidad and Tobago on the current, because there are 52 weeks in a year. The budget is around $53 billion, so it's over $1 billion a week the people of Trinidad and Tobago expend via the government. So if you sell assets, as they did, as we had to do with the APOs, and you then throw that at recurrent expenditure, those assets have disappeared. So this government looked at it, and we said the assets that we get from CLICO and CLF, how can we protect that for the future generations of Trinidad and Tobago, but still raise money to close the deficit? And this is important, and this is what PNM has done to protect the future generations of Trinidad and Tobago. We took those assets that are worth $8 billion, and rather than sell it for $8 billion, and the assets are lost forever, and then spend the $8 billion, no. We've ring-fenced the assets, the Republic Bank shares, the OCM shares, the Whitco shares, TGU. We've ring-fenced them, so they're now protected from anybody. And those assets will remain for the next 20 years for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. We're selling bonds that are backed by those assets, getting that money so we could close the deficit. And we've heard a lot of noise here today about, is it a good investment? Is it not a good investment? First of all, this is not for PNM. This is not for this government. This is for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And once again, I ask the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to note, Mr. Deputy Speaker, something positive being done. The protection of assets for the future generations of Trinidad, the deriving of cash, $4 billion, to try and close that deficit. All we've heard from the other side is, it will fail, it will be undersubscribed, what is the market appetite, etc. All they do, and then they want to claim patriotism. That is not patriotic behavior. We are protecting these assets for the future generations of Trinidad and Tobago, and it is an opportune time to remind the country of Trinidad and Tobago what happened under them with the FCB IPO when they started selling the shares of FCB, and the skullduggery that took place under the then Minister of Finance.
Deputy Speaker, 48.6, please. What is imputing?
Again, let's get a better word, please. A better word, yeah, a better word.
What happened under the IPO of FCB is they had certain persons who manipulated it, and this was a transaction taking place under the former administration, where they manipulated and found the loopholes in it and benefited in it at the expense of others. This NIF is designed for that not to happen. This NIF is designed to make sure that what they call the 1% or what they call the elite and what they like to call as those who want to get the crown jewels of Trinidad and Tobago cannot get their hands on it. And I stand here as a part of a government proud that we found a way to ring-fence these assets for the future of Trinidad and Tobago and not let the elites get their hands on these assets, but rather to put it in a fund that backs, that the assets back, and it allows the sale of bonds. And I was happy to hear the Honorable Minister of Finance to say that the minimum investment is $1,000, because that means that us, the people, can purchase in increments of $1,000. There is no bank in Trinidad and Tobago, no financial institution in Trinidad and Tobago that is offering a return on investment of over 4% on $1,000. None. even the smaller institutions that offer higher rates of interest, you have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars deposited with them for them to even offer you a rate of interest of 2%. So the government of Trinidad and Tobago has protected assets as allowing or giving an opportunity for persons with a minimum of $1,000 to get investments from 4% to over 6%, depending on the period of time, and it can be traded. Some of the other questions. We heard about the removal of central bank from the Freedom of Information Act. If a P&M administration removed the central bank from the Freedom of Information Act, what happened between 2010 and 2015 when you had a majority in Parliament? If you were so concerned about the freedom of information and the central bank, why didn't they put it back in place? It is the same thing they did with property tax. In 2010, we will axe the tax. We will get rid of the tax. I remind the people of Trinidad and Tobago, they hedge and they leverage. At the end of 2015, in September 2015, a UNC administration did not repeal property tax in Trinidad and Tobago. And it is the same thing with this ruse of freedom of information and the central bank. When they had a majority, and a constitutional majority, they didn't make any change. The Coleman report, and the Coleman report being kept secret. Again, an attempt to mislead the population of Trinidad and Tobago. The Prime Minister, upon receiving the Coleman report from the President, was advised by the Director of Public Prosecutions in no uncertain terms, asking him not to make the Coleman report public because he was conducting or overseeing criminal investigations, and it could have an effect on those investigations. So unlike what they did with the live sport report and threw it out there, made it public prematurely to let their friends out of trouble, this government did the responsible thing. And whoever has done wrong, let them face the consequences. And that was on the advice and the request of the Director of Public Prosecutions. The share value of CIB, of CLICO, TGU, WITCO, etc. I touched on this briefly, but just to let people understand, it's not CLICO shares going to back these funds, these bonds. It's not CIB either. It is the assets that came from those, and in the majority, it's the RBL assets, the OCM, the WITCO, and these are the assets, as we've spoken about, that are publicly traded, so that's how you get the value. I heard my friend talk about the interest of creditors. CLF is in liquidation, being managed by joint liquidators that actually are doing the Stanford liquidation. So these are international, globally recognized liquidators. Every single creditor, as is in accordance with law, has to put in a claim, including the government, has to put in a claim to the liquidators for the amount that they say is owed. They then go through priority. Everything is being dealt with in complete accordance and conformity with the laws of Trinidad and Tobago. And complete transparency. The liquidators have their claim process is ongoing. As I said, even the government. And I'd like to use that as a note to my friend Carney East. You'd be happy to know that for the first time since 2009, when we came in, the Minister of Finance had an exercise conducted to do with all of this CLICO and CLF. And you know what it was? One simple question. How much has this cost the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago? The accounting fees, the legal fees, all of the fees. Because as the Attorney General has been harping on whole afternoon, we didn't get a cent of interest from this money loaned to these few private shareholders. And under this administration, the first question we ask is we want to know what is the bill for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. That had never been asked before, and I was shocked when we heard that. And that is the sum of money that we're seeking to recover for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. So we had to go for the liquidation because they did not want to sit down and act in good faith. They wanted the assets back without giving you, as a taxpayer, anything for it after you had floated them for all these years without charging interest. Think about it. You spoke, Carney East, about when an investment you had was put into liquidation. At no point in time did anybody come to you, offer you a check, say, look, we will float you, etc. None of that happened. That is what they got here to the tune of over $25 billion. We have to protect it for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. You asked the question, member for Caroni East, about why not put the companies into NEL. That was something that was considered. But of course, as you know, NEL is a share that is traded on the stock exchange. You heard the Minister of Finance talk about why this is being done via bonds. Because a lot of institutional investors are up at their maximums when it comes to equity investments in shares. But they have a lot of margin to take bonds. That's one of the reasons. Also, if you now go and you try to backfill assets into NEL, it warps and changes a share that is already being exchanged and traded. This is the cleanest way, no matter what Caroni Central, his suggestions that it was complex, etc., as the Prime Minister said, we've taken a difficult situation, we found a solution, and we ask you to join with us, because it's not for PNM. This is for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. They're finally going to be repaid the money owed and loaned to these private shareholders who tried to shaft them in the end. We've ring-fenced and we've protected all of these assets for future generations. So your grandchildren and other people's grandchildren will have something in the future. If we had sold the shares, gotten the money and paid it in recurrent expenditure, nothing left. So join with us. It is something that is positive, it is good, it is refreshing, and it is not for us. It is for you all, and it is a guaranteed rate of return.
NEL doesn't have a guaranteed return.
Right? So we should all be looking to tell our constituents, take your money that you have, take the few $1,000s that you have, or the hundreds of millions that some may have, and invest it here. Stand behind bonds that the government are putting out. Let us make sure there's a future for the children of Trinidad and Tobago. Let us make sure that the assets are protected. You're getting guaranteed rates of return. If you have $8 billion worth of assets, and you only have a $4 billion you want to raise on it, it will pay itself out over time. Also, what we've calculated is dividends that you receive on the assets, as you heard the Minister say, is almost $400 million a year. The payments that have to go out on interest are less than $300 million a year. So that excess is going to go into a sinking fund to make sure as the bonds mature, 5 years, 12 years, 20, it will be able to repay it, and you still have the assets whole. Caroni Central, there will be capital appreciation on these assets. The assets will grow. So don't stand here and throw the negativity on it, etc., just for that sake. Ask the questions as you asked. Hopefully we've provided the answers. Hopefully you see the merit in it now, and understand that at the end of the day, this is not being done for PNM. This is being done for the future of Trinidad and Tobago. You talked about market appetite. There is market appetite, because as you heard, there's a lot of liquidity in the market. Also, what we're hoping is it allows an investment opportunity for the man on the street. And when you go at $1,000, your minimum, it allows an opportunity. Save your money. Don't throw your money away on things that have no returns. The government provided tax-free bonds. We brought the tax-free bonds. It allows investment, institutional investors. I heard the member for Caroni Central say he doesn't think UTC will have the appetite. Let's hope that UTC has the appetite. We believe UTC has the appetite. And let us
Give us some clarification on how you came up with the interest rates for the 5 years, 12 years, and give us an answer to that. Because it's high, we will have to pay.
That a relevant question, I was going to answer it. The Minister of Finance said he will address it in his wrap-up. I just want to put to rest, hopefully for the final time, and I don't blame my friend Caroni Central for raising the RBL 10% point and under the Financial Institutions Act and the rules that certain persons in RBL are raising to protect their comfy seats and thrones. FCB was 100% owned by former administrations, yours and the administration before. And FCB has loaned much more than 10%. RBL itself, while saying on the one hand and sending messages through Caroni Central, sending messages through other people, bombarding the Minister of Finance, bombarding myself and other people with this argument. It is a non-argument. It's a non-starter. You cannot protect. You just have to serve, do your job properly. And it makes absolutely no sense, because on the one hand, they're telling the Minister of Finance that, and on the other hand, they're shoving in front of him, this is our proposal to lend you billions of dollars more.
2 more.
Right?
Over
You can't have your
$1
cake
billion
and eat it.
Yesterday.
So we tell RBL,
Yesterday, I should send
stop
it
with the
back.
shenanigans,
Send it back.
stop with sending your lobbyists. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, for the future generations of Trinidad and Tobago, has acquired over, what was it, 25%, 23%, 26% of RBL. We're not giving up the rights to vote on those shares. We're not saying that directors can't be appointed or anything like that. We operate properly. We're not cutting any deals under the desk. We're not providing you with any protection you don't deserve, because you don't own RBL. Full stop. The people of Trinidad and Tobago now own RBL, and the people of Trinidad and Tobago will decide what they do with RBL. Full stop, whilst it's a PNM administration. And the future generations will get the capital appreciation and the dividends from RBL. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to just hopefully add some clarity to this issue, because it really is unfortunate when the population is misled. I think by now we all understand what it's about. The Minister of Finance will wrap up and provide the responses that you asked about, how we come up with these yields and these interest rates, but I can assure you it is completely covered, and those are conservative estimates going forward. On behalf of the constituents of Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, who I am encouraging to use whatever little savings they have and invest in these bonds, as hopefully we all will, I thank this administration for this opportunity and protecting the future for Trinidad and Tobago.
I recognize the member for Point to Pay.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I won't be too long, but I need some clarity via the Minister of Finance. But before I get there, I want to go back to the just concluded presentation or debate by the member of Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West. And I listened at the beginning of his debate. He was his normal, I wouldn't say arrogant, but his normal, not flamboyant, very powerful or zest and to try and refute some of the claims made by our members on this side. And then coming to the end of his presentation, he really started to make some sense. And after he calmed down and was able, you saw a level of sensibility in his presentation coming to the end. But, Deputy Speaker, I'm really taken aback by the member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, when he's talking about Republic Bank Limited and their shares. I remember in Parliament here, where the same RBL management team, directors, chairman, were all in support of certain legislation that this government wanted to pass. And we felt that we had to really fight the legislation for the betterment of Trinidad and Tobago, and which is the FATCA legislation. And we did that, and we came out with a good bill. So now we are hearing the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, talking so vehemently about the management and Republic Bank Limited, and now they control 26% of the shareholding, that they would not allow RBL to dictate to them what they do with these 26% shares. And this is something worrisome, because it's a message that the government of the day is sending to the people and the Republic Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And it is very worrisome, and I hope Republic Bank is listening, right? Because it is troubling to me. I'm a shareholder of Republic Bank, and I'm troubled, because I would not like to know that the government of the day, whether it is then this government or even when we come back into power, that we interfere with the running of an institution, of a financial institution. No, you wanted it? No, not you. So Deputy Speaker, I'm worrisome about that. I'm concerned about that. The other thing I want to ask the member for Digger Martin, Northeast, Minister of Finance, that when you look at the interest rates that is being offered by this government on the different tranches, T1, T2, T3, 5 years, 12 years, 20 years, it's very attractive interest rates. Very attractive interest rates. And if you listen to the member for Port of Spain, North, St. Anne's West, he talked about in his presentation that sometimes you might have to put in maybe 2 million plus or 5 million plus to even get a 2% return. And you listen to the Prime Minister, he said in his bank accounts he gets $0 and $7 and so forth. And that's a fact. Now, when you go back to the Clico debacle, Deputy Speaker, the reason the Clico debacle took place, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, sometimes when you're looking at interest rates and people are looking for investments, and that what happened in the Clico debacle, is that the interest rates that Clico was offering to the people were way above what the normal institutions were offering, Deputy Speaker. So I'm looking at these interest rates, and the member for Caroni East had asked a good, valid point, and I'm hoping that Digger Martin Northeast would indicate how these interest rates that are being offered really came about. Because he talked about they have the best advisors. And we haven't heard who those advisors are, how they came about it. And this is something that, sometimes a good thing is not always a good thing. So that the people have to be wary. And I don't want the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West to say I'm unpatriotic. Huh? So I'm just being very careful when sometimes something that is so attractive is not really what it's made out to be. So, Deputy Speaker, well, Deputy Speaker, when I was doing a little bit of research for this short presentation, I came across an article by the National Workers Union back on 9th of January 2018, written by one Keston K. Perry. And that was when the Honorable Prime Minister had just given his message for the new year of 2018 in early January. And the National Workers Union, when it was, I think, the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned in his speech about this National Investment Fund coming sometime later in the year. And it was about the small man being able to invest. Again, the Minister of Finance, previously in his mid-year review, he talked about the National Investment Fund and it was about the small man being able to invest. And I must give kudos to the government. They have bought the denominations of the bond of $1,000. So it sounds very attractive for the small man. But really and truly, Deputy Speaker, in the times that we are in, I don't know if the small man could really invest in this bond. I really hope. What? So, Deputy Speaker, it is something that gives me great concern given the economy that we're in, the attractiveness of the rate. And when you listen to the Prime Minister, when he laid out, and he got the information from the Minister of Finance of the liquidity that is in the banking system via institutions, via maybe individual holders and so on. And I know the Minister of Finance don't really want me to talk about the economy that he said has turned. Let us not forget he said the economy has turned. So, Deputy Speaker, when you read through this article, and nothing has changed since January 9th to now, nothing. And I just want to read a part in the article by Keston Perry, and I quote, "My understanding is that it will be where the private investors, this is the National Investment Fund he's talking about, mainly high income and upper middle income earners, can buy units, but Israeli bonds, that will be denominated so that investors earn interest and other rewards on their investment. Contrary to the Prime Minister's statement, regular working people cannot afford to invest and do not have the surplus income so to do. So they will lose out, and those with means and political connection will gain more wealth, Deputy Speaker. Now, I am hoping that is not the case. I am hoping that is, I'm being disturbed, Deputy Speaker.
Okay, again, point appears on the floor, so silence, members.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. So, you are now floating $4 billion in bonds. The investment fund is made up of shares gotten via the CLICO debacle, and that's fine. But I have a problem with the TGU valuation and ownership put into this investment fund at this point in time, Deputy Speaker. And I'm trying to understand what is the rationale. Because when you look at the value of the shares of what came from CLICO, the Republic Bank value is $4.3 billion, Witco 405, OCM 200 million, Angostura 970 million. That, when you tally that up, because they only came up with a value of TGU of $2.025 billion, and that's a total value of $8 million. So when you deduct the TGU value, you're down to about $6 billion. So I'm trying to understand, why would you want to create this fund and put the TGU, which is a crown jewel in my view, that is owned 100% by the state. It is a profitable organization at this point in time.
Members, again, in summing up, right, or use the standing order accordingly on a point of order, so and let's do the proper fashion, members. Point appear again, address the chair. Proceed.
Addressing you whole evening, Deputy Speaker. They don't want me to address you. So, who? No, AG, okay, go ahead.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member. Honourable Member, you've raised a very important line of discussion. Would you mind just expounding upon the toxicity for including TGU? What is the rationale that the opposition believes that TGU should not, as a crown jewel of this country, be shared amongst the citizens of this country? If you could just expound.
Thank you, AG. AG, I understand. You see, the TGU shares, the ownership, it's free and clear, all right? It gets its income from TNTech, basically, because it sells the power. We are talking about trying to recover for the people of Trinidad and Tobago from the CLICO debacle. So you have these shares that was gotten out of CLICO. Why you want to commingle?
Good point.
Commingle a crown jewel as TGU at this point in time, with the shares of the CLICO debacle. And, you know, the TGU, why bring it into this fund at this point in time? Because you have enough assets to cover your $4 billion that you want to put out on the public sale. So why would you want to bring in that? I keep using your crown jewel, save that for a rainy day. Why do you want to? It is interesting. I'm yet to find the answer. Why would you want to bring TGU in at this point in time? But I guess the Minister of Finance will be able to answer me in his wind-up. The other point I would like to ask the Minister of Finance is that when he started off his presentation, he talked about the taxpayers of the country being owed $23 billion total of the CLICO issue. The Port of Spain North St. Anne's West member went up to $25 billion. Then it somewhere is now owed $15 billion. The question I would like to ask the Minister of Finance, these shares or these values of the CLICO debacle that came out, the Republic Bank, Witco, OCM, Angostura, is that value or it's less $15 billion now? What is really owed to the taxpayers at the end of when this investment fund is set up? Is it still 15 billion or 15 billion less the value of the shares? I haven't gotten that in his presentation this afternoon. So, because the country needs to know what is the now true debt owed by CLICO. So, these are some of the questions I put out on the table there, Deputy Speaker. I have a concern with TGU. I have a concern with the interest rates that are being offered at this point in time, given it's very attractive. And I hope in his wind-up, the Minister of Finance will give me an answer. With those few words, Deputy Speaker, I thank you.
I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank all those who were too slow to get up. Including my colleague to my left. Because I think we need to bring closure to this debate. What I find intriguing, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the member for Pointe-a-Pierre spoke, the member for Caroni Central spoke. So you see, it wasn't me all the time.
Members,
No, it wasn't.
I spoke earlier. I spoke earlier about it. So am I to say on the next occasion?
Make him take a walk. So Caroni Central, Honorable Caroni Central, Caroni East spoke. The bill has one clause on one page, Mr. Deputy Speaker. About 4 lines. And in all that fulmination and carrying on and ranting and raving, not once did they make reference to these 4 lines. Not once. They talk for hours. Not once. They talk about the exemption of the profits or the exemption of the interest. Not once. You did not. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I was truly disappointed in the contributions from the honorable members opposite. Truly, truly, truly disappointed. Bereft of intellect, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Bereft of intellect. When you get a question coming from the honorable member for Caroni East, how did you value the companies? That is the question posed to us. But in my statement, introducing this bill, I said unequivocally, unambiguously, categorically, and emphatically, and pellucidly, and clearly that the shares would be transferred at market value. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can go, Mr. Deputy Speaker, you can go on the website of the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, as I have done, Mr. Deputy Speaker. You can check the daily trading summaries. You can go there now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and you can get the value at which Republic Bank shares trade, Mr. Deputy Speaker. A click of a button, and you will see the value of a Republic Bank share. The click of another button, you will see Angostura, you will see Whitco, you will see One Caribbean Media. The only asset that is not a listed company is TGU. And we said that we utilized the services of a reputable international valuer who has placed the value of those shares at $2.025 billion. And what's beating me, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they were in government for 5 years, you know. They use the same valuers that we have been using. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't understand these questions. These questions betray a lack of intellect. Right. It makes me wonder, did they ever write exams or did somebody write exams for them? I'm concerned. I'm concerned, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Because, yes, it's true. I wonder whether persons wrote exams for you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, the interest rates, for example, the central bank has a yield curve. You know, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they all came to this parliament today without doing a shred of research. Not an iota. Not even 1 second did they spend on doing research. If you went on the central bank website, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and you look at the yield curve for borrowing, and you look at it in terms of May 2018, Mr. Speaker, this is government borrowing, and the central bank will give you the rates for tenors starting at 6 months, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way up to 30 years, Mr. Deputy Speaker, updated regularly on the central bank website. And if you look at the yield curve for government borrowings for a 5-year instrument, the current interest rate is 3.53%. If you look at the yield curve for a 12-year borrowing, and this is all readily available, if they were at all interested in determining the facts, determining the truth, and doing any kind of proper scientific debate today, they could have done this. But you go there, you will see the yield curve. The interest rate for 12 years is 4.66%. And if you go to 20 years, you get 5.55%. What are the rates we are offering? We are offering 4.5% for 5 years, 1% above for government borrowing. We are offering 5.7% for 12 years, 1% above the yield curve for government borrowing, and we are offering 6.6% for 20 years, 1% above the current government yield curve. And that is for securities that are fully backed by the government and are offered by the government, by the corporation sold. Because we want the National Investment Fund to be a success, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and because we want the citizens of this country to benefit, from the recovery of taxpayers' dollars that have been put into CLICO, to bail out CLICO,
Continue to benefit.
we are giving taxpayers of this country a benefit. So we are pegging these bonds, which are for the people of this country, at 1% above the government yield curve. Above.
Thank you.
Above.
Thank you.
That is for the benefit of John Public.
Correct.
That is to give back to the population the assets from the CLICO group, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Comrade Roger, do you talk to you?
I have more than a school leaving certificate. That's all right.
What was your first choice?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what bothered me as well, so that's how we did the interest rates. There's a current government yield curve which is updated on a regular basis, and we've gone 1% above to give back to the people of this country, to give back the money,
Well done, PNM.
taxpayers' money.
It's a gift that keeps on giving.
It's a gift that keeps on giving, as the member for San Fernando West says. I didn't say that. He said he doesn't have one. I never said anything about that. I say I don't have one. And he said, "You
Members,
have one."
please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, what also bothered me was the fulminations of the member for Caroni Central. Bereft of fact, bereft of logic, bereft of intellect. In 2012, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I can't recall exactly whether they had fired Mary King yet or not, but I rather suspect so, that by November 2012 they had fired Mary King. I hear the member for Couva North sitting in the wrong seat saying yes. So in November 2012, November 2012, the member for Caroni Central was a member of the UNC government. And in November 2012, there was an entity that was formed by the then UNC government. And you know what that entity was called, Mr. Deputy Speaker? It was called the Clico Trust Corporation Limited. And you know what that entity was, Mr. Deputy Speaker? It was a wholly owned state enterprise. And you know who was the first chairman of that wholly owned state enterprise, the Clico Trust Corporation Limited, formed when the member for Caroni Central was a member of the government, a public servant. And you know what was the function of the Clico Trust Corporation Limited, a wholly owned state enterprise? It was to receive and own 25% of Republic Bank. And this is the kind of thing I have to listen to. So in 2012, when all of them was in government, they created a wholly owned state enterprise called the Clico Trust Corporation Limited. And the Clico Trust Corporation Limited, a wholly owned state enterprise headed by a public servant, was vested with the ownership of 25% of Republic Bank.
Nothing was wrong with that.
And still owns that 25% to this day.
And nothing wrong with that.
Which triggers the shareholding limit that they know.
Which triggered the 10% limit in 2012.
But they had, that didn't concern.
In 2012.
2013.
So
Because Batiste ring
if the logic is correct, that if a related party, the actual terminology is a connected party, if a connected party owns more than 10%, you can't lend more than a certain percentage of your capital, your paid up capital, then the UNC government violated that section of the Financial Institutions Act. No, with Republic Bank in November 2012, when they created the Clico Trust Corporation and vested 25% of Republic Bank in that wholly owned state enterprise run by a public servant.
And they acknowledged because they said they wouldn't put a director. So
But I have to listen to this foolishness.
every bond they did would have been.
And you know what bothered me as well, Mr. Deputy Speaker? FCB was 100% owned by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. 100%. When I went to school, 100 was more than 10. In fact, 100 is 90 more than 10. So therefore, when FCB was 100% owned by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, which it was for several years under the UNC government, then FCB was in violation of this legislation 1,000 times.
That's right.
Because the government didn't own 10% of FCB. It still owns about 70%. It owned 100%.
But it means every borrowing.
So it means
by
that
the
every
AG was
single
illegal.
borrowing approved by the Attorney General, approved by the Cabinet, of which the member for Caroni Central was a part, every single bond, every single borrowing lent to the government of the UNC by FCB and RBL was a breach. Now, it's amazing that that whole 5-year period passed and it wasn't an issue. You had taken 25% of Republic Bank and put it in a state enterprise, but it wasn't an issue. You owned 100% of FCB, you only divested 20% eventually and came down to 80. It was no problem. But all of a sudden now, when this government decides to take ownership of 26% for the people, is a problem. It is because, Madam Speaker, so, Mr. Deputy Speaker, these words, the words that are coming into this House are the words of instruments and lackeys of the business class. They are lackeys of the business class. It was no problem then, but it's a problem now. And I am very disappointed that the honourable member for Caroni Central did not declare that he used to be a director of Republic Bank. He was a director of Republic Bank.
No.
He did not declare his antecedents. He used to sit down and knock glass and eat with them fellas. Them same fellas who send him in the parliament today. Sit down there and knock glass with them. Yes, he was a director of Republic Bank.
Silence, members.
He was a director of Republic Bank.
And he was on audit commission.
Minister of Health, please.
What I can't take is the lack of principles, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when they speak. No principles. No principles. Absolutely no principles. All we are doing in this parliament today is that we are bringing a piece of legislation to exempt the interest on bonds issued by the National Investment Company Limited from tax. That's it. What we're not doing anything that is earth-shattering. We're not doing anything that they haven't done before.
The benefit to the people is good.
We're not doing anything miraculous.
It's brilliant on our part.
And you see, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what bothered me as well. There was a well-ventilated court case. I don't need any drowsy anything. Good. There was a well-ventilated court matter, Mr. Deputy Speaker, where every allegation made by the shareholder directors of the CL Group were put into the public record. Nothing was secret. What happened was a matter of public record. It went before a High Court judge. It went before the Court of Appeal, and it reached the Privy Council. And all of the things that the member for Caroni East said, all of those things he repeated as a messenger in this parliament today from his friends at CL Financial, everything that he said proved to be false. He's just repeating fake news. That's all. And you know what I've noticed with this particular opposition? They are so desperate, they've got to the point of making up their own fake news and believing it. I saw that in this parliament here last week. I see a question. I saw a question, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I was acting for the Honorable Dr. Keith Rowley. He had gone to the opening of the Grenada Parliament. And the first question I see on Prime Minister's questions is, why did the government sell shares in TGU? That's question one. Question two is, how much you sell them for? Question three, what method you use to sell them? So I look at these three questions. I said, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but we didn't sell TGU. These people mad. And in the mid-year review, I had made it crystal clear that we were putting the shares of TGU together with Republic Bank and Whitco and OCM, Angostura. We were putting those shares to underwrite the asset base of the National Investment Fund. I couldn't have said it clearer. It was in English, black and white. I listed the assets. It's on the records of the Hansard that we were putting the shares of TGU into the asset base of the National Investment Fund. That mid-year review was when, April? We're in June. And I see a question, why all you sell TGU and how much you sell it for and who you sell it to and the method for selling it. It's mad people we're dealing with here, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They're making up their own.
Deputy Speaker, 48-6, please. I'm not going to tolerate it.
It's true, it's true.
Members. Member, just rephrase, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, if members sit in a house of Parliament and hear the Minister of Finance tell them that the shares in TGU are going to be placed in the asset base of the National Investment Fund. Not once, because it was said in the 2018 budget address as well, but twice. They hear that. And then 2 months later, they want to know how much you sell the shares for and who you sell them to and how you go about them selling it. And I heard it featured in the Monday Night Forum too. So if you put those facts together, that they are told that this company is going into the asset base of the National Investment Fund, but they want to know who you sell it to. If they are not mad people, that has to be...
Please, Minister of Finance, please. In all your experience, I know you can do better than that. Rephrase, withdraw, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm not finished. With your permission, I will retract and stop wherever you want, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I'm not finished. If those are not the utterances of mad people, I said if, then that is the perfect definition of insanity.
What is he trying to allude? That we are in
The Chief Representative. Minister of Finance, please, for the records, those two words, retract, and again, move on to a new point accordingly.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I most humbly retract calling them insane. Allow what? I retracted it.
He identified what he retracted.
I retracted it.
You don't want him to retract it?
I wouldn't retract it if you don't want me to, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So the bottom line is that all that you have heard today is empty, vacuous, politically dishonest speech, politically dishonest.
Intellectually vapid.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the words over there were just empty, bereft of logic, seeking and serving vested interest. They came into this parliament today as instruments of the elite, instruments of the wealthy and the privileged. They came in this parliament today to serve the interests of the rich, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But we on this side will have none of that. We know what we are doing is for the benefit of the people. We know we are giving the people the returns on the investment of their taxpayers' dollars in the CLICO bailout. We know that by giving the little man the opportunity to earn 4.5%. And Mr. Speaker, they have a habit, Mr. Deputy Speaker, they have a habit of belittling people in this country. That's right. They have a habit of belittling people in this country.
Members, please. Who's belittling? Overruled.
What's standing order?
Members, please. Members, please. All right. First of all, Couva North, I would like you to go to your appropriate seat, please. Right? Based on the couple of feedbacks, I'll only recognize you from your proper seat. Right? And secondly, members, on the second point, again, standing order 53. Right? Let's maintain it, please, the decorum of the House. Yes, you all can make low tones, but not the loud ones across the floor. I'm not going to tolerate it. Right? So I recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I indicated, the members opposite have a habit of belittling people in this country. Your typical daily paid worker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, retires with a gratuity.
Correct.
Your typical public servant who has saved all of his or her working years in the credit union or in the bank, or has saved to make investments and so on. There are hundreds of thousands of people like that in this country. Hundreds of thousands of people. The Prime Minister made the point, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we have 100 billion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, seriously, could you control the other side, please?
Members, come on. Honorable members. I don't want to have to get up on my legs again in order to speak about disturbance and the decorum of the House based on Standing Order 53. Right? If members need a copy of the Standing Order in order to know what Standing Order 53, it can be supplied. Minister of Finance, proceed.
Yes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'll just use a few examples. Look at the poor people who suffered because of the reckless conduct of the people in CLICO and in HCU, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They lost a significant portion of their savings. Yes, they were attracted by the unreasonably high rates which were not backed by assets. That's the difference between our bonds. Our bonds are backed by assets which are worth twice the value. And that's the other part that disturbs me with the lack of intellect on that side. We have $8 billion in assets. We are issuing $4 billion in bonds. And if you look at something like Republic Bank, which makes up, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when you look at an asset like Republic Bank, which is making up over 50%, making up 55% of the asset base of the National Investment Fund. When you look at the evolution of the shares of Republic Bank over the last 25 years, the shares of Republic Bank have steadily increased over the last 20 years. It is highly unlikely, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that shares in Republic Bank could ever lose any significant value. It is more than likely that over the 10 to 20-year period of the bonds, that shares in Republic Bank would increase exponentially. So we not only are giving people a very generous interest rate, but you're also backing the bonds by blue chip assets, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But when you look at the daily paid worker who doesn't know what to do with his gratuity, when you look at the teacher who retires and does not know what to do with their savings or their gratuity, when you look at the 20,000 persons, who were caught in the CLICO collapse and moved from a position of earning 8% on their money down to a position of less than 1% of their money right now. You would have somebody maybe that might have $100,000 or $200,000 in savings, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They had put that into CLICO. They were getting 8% on their money, generating maybe $16,000 a year from that investment. Well, let's say 10%. Let's round it off at 10. So somebody who had $250,000 that they had saved over the years, they get it through back pay, they get it through gratuity and so on, they have $250,000. They would earn $25,000 a year out of CLICO. That's what they were getting. And they went from $25,000 a year down to less than 1%. So they dropped from $25,000 a year down to $2,000. A significant decline. We are giving these people an opportunity to retrieve and recover the income earning capability that they had when they were invested in these funds like in CLICO and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There is nowhere in Trinidad and Tobago, nowhere in the region that anybody can, any ordinary man or woman who may have $50,000 or $100,000 could get 4.5% on their money. And they can leverage it, they can use it as security, they can trade the bonds if they run into problems and so on, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I find it shocking that anybody would want to question this gift that we are giving back to the taxpayers. Only wicked people would question this. Wicked people. Imagine the member for Point-a-Pay questioning, saying the interest rate too high. What standing order? I am not giving way to you. What standing order?
Member, on what point?
A second ago, he's saying wicked people, and then he's referring to the member for Point Up here.
Overruled.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know, there's a problem with comprehension on that side. I said only a wicked person would object to this if they want to associate themselves with being wicked. That is their business. I said only a wicked person would object to this. I didn't say they were wicked. But if the cap fit, let them wear it, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But I heard the member for Point Up here say the interest rate too high. He said the interest rate too high. Yes, he said that. And he tried, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the member for Point Up here tried to equate the National Investment Fund where the assets, the blue chip assets, are twice the value of the bond offering to the CLICO scheme, where the assets were in no way equivalent to the liabilities of CLICO. Trying to frighten people. Don't want the people to get these bonds. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We were elected to serve for 5 years. We were elected to solve this CLICO fiasco. We were elected to help the people of this country, and by God, we're going to help the people of this country. And we will do what we have to do. And we will give the people this gift. We will give them these tax-free bonds, and anybody could come in here and lobby for big business if they want. They shall not frighten us. They shall not chase us. We will do what is in the people's interest. I beg to move, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Honorable members, the question is that this bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, be now read a second time. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 681, I beg to move that the Corporation Tax Amendment Bill 2018 be committed to a committee of the whole.
Do you have any amendments?
Yeah.
Honorable members, the question is that the Corporation Tax Amendment Bill 2018 be committed to the committee of a whole. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. This House will now go into the committee of the whole to consider the bill clause by clause.
Clause 1.
Welcome. The question is that clause 1 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 1 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 1 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 2.
The question is that clause 2 now stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 2 now stands part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the bill be now reported to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. The House will now resume.
Deputy Speaker, I wish to report that the Corporation Tax Amendment Bill 2018, which everybody on that side will use to buy bonds, was considered in Committee of the Whole and approved without amendments. Yes,
Let's
sir.
read it as is
Sorry,
for the
sir.
records here, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to report that the Corporation Tax Amendment Bill 2018 was considered in Committee of the Whole and approved without amendments. Yeah. I now beg to move that the House agree with the committee's report.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree with the committee's report on the Corporation Tax Amendment Bill 2018. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, be forthwith read a third time and passed so that they could buy bonds.
Minister, the last part for the Hansard omitted. Yes, sir. Right, that's the last part. Yes, read it over for the records. Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, be forthwith read a third time and passed.
Thank you. Honorable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502, be now read a third time and pass. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Corporation Tax Act, Chapter 7502. Motions.
The Attorney General.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that the Senate amendments to the Land Tribunal Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017, listed in Appendix 1 to the order paper, be now considered.
Honorable members, the question is that the Senate amendments to the Land Tribunal Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017, listed in Appendix 1 to the order paper, be now considered. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Clause 4, in subsection 3B2, after the word office, insert the words and such salary, remuneration, and allowances of the chairman, deputy chairman, and other members of the tribunal shall be a charge on the consolidated fund.
The Attorney General.
Speaker, I beg to move that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to Clause 4 of the Land Tribunal Amendment Number 2 Bill 2018. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this amendment to Clause 4, as brought from the Senate, is very straightforward. It is simply to improve the insulation attracted to the position of tribunal post holders. It is to further insulate the chairman, deputy chairman, and other members of the tribunal from any potential influence or pressure from the executive by explicitly providing that their salary, remuneration, and allowance would be a charge on the consolidated fund. We cause this amendment to subsection 2 of Clause 3B, That simply is a repetition of words which we find elsewhere in a number of other laws, including the Industrial Court primary legislation. It borrows from language for constitutional maturity from the Constitution itself, and it is something which is intended simply to ensure that there, in addition to the provision that terms and conditions cannot be altered to the detriment of those office holders, which mirrors up with Section 136(6) of the Constitution, that we also go further to ensure that the source of funds is such that the charge will always be to the consolidated fund. I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clause number 4 of the Land Tribunal Amendment Bill number 2. Number 2 Bill 2017. Member for Tabakiti.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, this is a very important clause in terms of what it portends to achieve. And the ability of the Parliament to ensure legislation that insulates an important decision-making body whose decisions can have far-reaching effect upon people and their property and so on. It is very important that we as a Parliament do all that is in our power to create the conditions for the fullest level of the extent of independence in decision-making which such a body can, in fact, achieve. Because, Mr. Deputy Speaker, one of the tragedies of our institutions charged with the need to be independent in terms of decisions is the manner in which such independence is promoted through legislation. Protection, especially from executive influence in the exercise of their powers, is, in my view, very important for members of the Land Tribunal, especially executive influence. And the reason for this, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that we live in a very small society in which everyone knows each other, and a society which has come to be known as the contact society, the society of influence. But more than that, in this small society, perceptions of bias and accusations of bias are often heard, and people often report feeling unfairly treated with respect to decision-making by many institutions in this country, rightly or wrongfully so, but the perception of bias and of wrongful treatment, unfair treatment, is often part and parcel of what we hear. We are a society also in which perceptions of political influence in decision-making abounds, and particularly so given the mode of appointment of public officials and the manner in which sometimes open political affiliation does not prevent people from being appointed to very important positions of influence. And so often we have to just trust that people have the integrity to rise above their political affiliations in order to ensure that the perception of fair treatment and independence is fulfilled. I mean, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are seeing on the newspapers fairly regularly now, in the last couple of weeks, all kinds of accusations being made against public officials. And in fact, as recently as yesterday or day before, in the newspapers about a public official being sent home on 608 accusations. And therefore, it is extremely important what we are doing here today, that we respect what we are committing to and what we should be committed to. So that my point is that if we are to develop a society in which citizens have faith and citizens have trust in the institutions of governance, then we must, in our legislation, create conditions that promote independence in terms of decision-making, and to do so without the society fearing that such decisions makers can be prejudiced. But in addition to that, the Attorney General correctly pointed out that we need to insulate the decision makers, and we must ensure that they be given the kind of remuneration and the kind of protection. Because we are looking at the Land Tribunal having, I believe, and I'm subject to correction, but my understanding is having the same status as a court of superior record. And the member should therefore be given the same protection as a judge and exercise their powers free, and I want to repeat, particularly from executive influence. Correct. We are a society which have always tried to have a separation of powers between the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, and what have you. And at the end of the day, Mr. Deputy Speaker, despite our best efforts here in the Parliament, despite the best laws we pass, and I want to congratulate my colleagues in the other place, through whose efforts we are here today with these amendments, and they made quite a valid contribution. Very often, this opposition is accused of not making great contributions to legislation. But we have often made the point that we are concerned about good law and not just law. And, permit me to compliment particularly Senator Gerald Ramdeen in the Senate for his contribution, and Senator Saddam Hussein for their contribution in this particular matter that before here today. So the opposition needs to be congratulated and take credit for the manner in which it is standing up for the independence of institutions of governance in the interest of citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And of all the peoples of Trinidad and Tobago. Because in a diverse society, it's easy to see discrimination. It is easy to see prejudice. And despite our best efforts at law, at the end of the day, it is the strength and integrity of those whom we appoint as officials to these very important positions, like the Land Tribunal, that will ultimately determine independence. Not just the laws, but the integrity and the strength of the persons to stand up against influence in terms of their thought and decision-making that will make a difference to the moral levels to which we should ascend and to the entire question of morality in public affairs. I thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank my learned colleague for a very tight contribution. I join in my learned colleague's reflections that public officials ought to be protected. I just wish to very quickly state that protection of public officials does not equate to the fact that they must not be accountable. And when one sees accountability in the newspapers and in the public discourse, our society requires accountability. There has been for far too long a push that an executive ought not to have management, and the question is always where that balance is to be had. How far ought that pendulum to swing? This government prides itself on ensuring due process and on transparency. The amendment which is put before us is an express version of what is already implied in the law. I want to remind Mr. Deputy Speaker, this government on simple majority legislation could simply do as the last government did, where the line that I in particular received when I sat opposite in Senate from the Attorney General opposite me was the government's position is not to take amendments. That's right. And that was all that it was. But this government does not portray itself or manage its affairs such that we will not take advantage of all submissions. The Senate is an entirely different house. We're very pleased to bring these amendments here today to allow for an expression that is perhaps a little bit more expansive and for a move away from reliance upon the implied. In those circumstances, I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clause number 4 of the Land Tribunal Amendment number 2 Bill 2017. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Attorney General.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that the Senate amendments to the Land Adjudication Amendment Number 2, Bill 2017, listed in Appendix 2 to the order paper, be now considered.
Honourable members, the question is that the Senate amendments to the Land Adjudication Amendment Number 2, Bill 2017, listed in Appendix 2 to the order paper, be now considered. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Clause 4A, delete paragraph A and replace with the following new paragraph. A in subsection 1, Roman numeral 1, by deleting the words an adjudication officer and substituting the words a chief adjudication officer, and Roman numeral 2, by deleting the words shall be appointed by the and substituting the words shall be appointed for a period of 5 years by the President on the advice of the. B, in paragraph B, A, in proposed subsection 1A, delete the words recruited and replace with the word appointed. B, in proposed subsection 1B, delete the words and shall be appointed by the and replace with the words who shall be appointed for a period of 3 years by the President on the advice of the. C, insert after proposed subsection 1B the following new subsections. 1C, the remuneration, allowances, and other conditions of the Chief Adjudication Officer and Deputy Adjudication Officers shall not be altered to their disadvantage after their appointment and during their tenure of office. 1D, there shall be paid to the Chief Adjudication Officer or a Deputy Adjudication Officer such remuneration and allowances as may be determined by the President, and such remuneration and allowances shall be a charge on the consolidated fund. 1E, notwithstanding that their term of office has expired, the Chief Adjudication Officer and a Deputy Adjudication Officer may, with the approval of the President, continue in office for such a period after the expiry of their term as may be necessary to complete adjudications conducted by them in an adjudication area or to do anything in relation to proceedings that were commenced before their term of office expired. C, in paragraph F, A, in proposed subsection 8B, by deleting the words reasonable notice and replace with the words no less than 14 days notice. And B, in proposed subsection 8A, Roman numeral 1, delete the word and replace with open quotation, close quotation, and Roman numerals 2, delete the words which will require and replace with the word requiring. 11, clause 11, A, in paragraph B, A, delete subparagraph B1 and replace with the following new subparagraph. Roman numeral 1 in paragraph B, A, by inserting after the words such possession the words with the intention to possess the land as his own, and B, by deleting the word 30 and substituting the word 60. C, by deleting the word absolute and substituting the word provisional.
In subparagraph 2, in proposed paragraph C, insert the words such possession, the words with the intention to possess the land as his own, and B, in paragraph C, in proposed subsection 5, insert after the words 1, the words B and clause 19. Delete paragraph A and replace with the following. A, by deleting paragraph A and substituting the following paragraph. A, having been served with a notice. Delete paragraph A and replace with the following. A, by deleting paragraph A and substituting the following new paragraph. A, having been served with a notice issued by an adjudication officer under section 4.6, willfully neglects to attend in pursuance of such notice. Semicolon.
Attorney General.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses 4, 11, and 19 of the Land Adjudication Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017. Mr. Deputy Speaker, these three particular clauses are proposed to be amended in the fashion described in the schedule to the order paper and as articulated by the clerks, really to achieve three purposes. One, to treat with terms and conditions and ensuring a better form of stability, expressly in line with that which we have adopted for the Land Tribunal, where we ensure that salaries, terms, and conditions are not only made to not suffer derogation as the original bill provides, where one can have terms and conditions expressly not derogated away from that which was given, but also to include that charges stand as charges against the consolidated fund. Specifically with respect to Clause 4, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's interesting to note that the original bill did not contemplate a time frame for the appointment. Now, that is not something which is uncommon. In fact, it was very much the characteristic of legislation which prevailed in the period from the year 1999 onward, straight through to in or around the year 2012. The Senate asked for there to be a prescriptive time period for appointments. And in this instance here, they asked for the Chief Adjudication Officer to have an express period of 5 years. The government didn't find that an objectionable provision. It was certainly something which was welcomed. It is not something which is untoward in terms of any form of suspicion, because a cabinet always appoints with a time limit for these circumstances. In any event, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Land Adjudication Bill at Clause 4 must be factored in the context of the clause itself. And when we look to Clause 4 of the bill, we note that the adjudication officer and deputy adjudication officer is something which could not have been interfered with by an executive because they are JLSC appointments. They are appointed by the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. It was for that reason that it was not any form of oversight in the successive parliaments that considered this legislation from the year 1999 straight up to 2017. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we look to the position of the Deputy Adjudication Officer, the Senate recommended a lesser period, in this instance 3 years. Again, this is a JLSC appointment, one which is protected by the Service Commission aspects of our Constitution, well within the Hines dicta of the Privy Council, as we are now all accustomed to. The introduction of Clause 4, the amendment to Clause 4 by introducing a new 1C, that remuneration, allowances, and other terms and conditions shall not be altered to disadvantage of the appointment and tenure of office holders, is again a reflection of Section 136(6) of the Constitution, where there is express language to that effect. And it marries up now with that amendment which this House has just accepted as it relates to the office holders for the Land Tribunal. The insertion of the new Clause 1D into Clause 4, that there shall be remuneration charged as a charge on the consolidated fund, is again a repetition of the formula which we've used for the Land Tribunal. It therefore made sense to harmonize it with that approach, as these laws are intended to articulate with each other. In the new Clause 1E, we have added in an express provision such that office holders who are given term limits now for 5 years and for 3 years can have an express provision in the parent law that they can sit to complete matters which were under their docket in any event. Again, this is something which is implied, but it was felt that it could have been better expressed in express formula, particularly insofar as our society has become by far more litigious, and therefore the issue of a judicial office holder or quasi-judicial office holder in this instance being functus or without authority because of a lapse in tenure was sought to be treated with expressly. This is something which has become a feature of the interpretation of courts in recent times, and therefore we erred on the side of caution but it certainly could have been treated with by the common law. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have sought to cause an amendment into subclause 4.8. Instead of just simply relying upon a demarcation officer or survey officer giving reasonable notice when there is a request for permission to enter upon property, we have put in a de minimis period that the notice must not only be reasonable, but it must in all circumstances be no less than 14 days. And that is what the amendment seeks to provide here. The amendments to clause 4.8 capital A are merely just grammatical corrections where we change which will require to the word requiring instead. We move next to clause 11, which amends section 16 of the Parent Act. In clause 11, we are taking effectively, one, a decision to have an express statement of what the law actually is, and two, we're seeking to treat with private lands and public lands in the same fashion. Let me explain this. Clause 11 of the bill, which amends section 16 of the Parent Act, treats with the adjudication exercise where people roll up and produce documentation or title information or evidence of their occupation. One, where they own lands themselves, so they produce their RPO documentation or their deeds to the adjudication officer. In those circumstances where there are no disputes, section 16(1)(a) will simply say that the adjudication officer records that title as an absolute title. In 16(1)(b), we treated with private lands. And in that, as we will recall, this House was asked to harmonize not from 30 years, but instead to 16 years, because there was a wrong statement in the law as it stood, even though it was unproclaimed. And the original House amendment was that we treat with the move from 30 years to 16 years. What we did in this case here, the original bill which left this House, was that if you were in adverse possession on private lands for over 16 years, you would go to the adjudication officer, produce your evidence, and the adjudication officer would have marked the title as absolute. What we felt we should do was to better utilize the land tribunal, even though the adjudication officer is really just recording fact. We felt it better, both for private lands and for public lands, state lands. Any point of adverse possession, that is both ends of the equation, send that to the tribunal. And so what we did was to allow for the land tribunal to receive adverse possession claims for private lands. And we thought that that was an important amendment to be made, so that under section 16(3) of the Parent Act, all adverse possession claims, whether for private lands or for public lands, would go to the land tribunal and go through the advertisement positions and hearing aspects and judicial determination, and put it properly again for further due processing insofar as one has the appeal to the courts of Trinidad and Tobago beyond the land tribunal. Next, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have asked in both clauses, in clause 11, where we treat with the possession aspects, both for state and for private lands, we've taken an expression now at the recommendation of the Senate to be explicit in the elements of adverse possession. The law is well settled and has been for umpteen years that to be a successful adverse possessor, when you make your application to the court, you must have two elements. First of all, you must have in fact possession, that is, you must have physical possession for the requisite statutory period, after which you extinguish the statutory claim, the rights of persons who own the land otherwise. That is what you call a documented title holder. So after 16 years and after 30 years for private and for public lands, once you are in fact in possession, that's element number one. The second element is what you call the animus possidendi, or the intention to physically possess the lands. And that intention to possess the lands has been interpreted in many courts from the Privy Council come back down across the Commonwealth. And it is a clear expression. Now, it is true that we could have read this into possession, because if you're dealing with adverse possession, you can never not satisfy both limbs. You have to have physical possession and the intention to possess, meaning you're not acquiescing in someone else's claim. So if you possess someone's land and you are paying them rent every year, clearly you didn't have the intention to be an adverse possessor. You were acknowledging somebody's superior right to the ownership of property. So the Senate asked, and the government did not object, for a clearer expansion of the language to be in line with what the common law currently is in respect of this. But the bill itself, in its original form, was safe. Of course, there is merit in the fact that one could always be better off by having a clear expression of the law, and it is in those circumstances that we have introduced the animus possidendi, the intention to possess, in the clear language as set out in the amendments to Clause 4 proposed. Mr. Deputy Speaker, if we look further down to Clause 11, as proposed. If we look further down into Clause 11, we are simply treating with a consequential amendment. When we get down to what would be Section 16, subclause 5, we're introducing B and, that is a reference to subsection 16(1)B, so that we can take care of the consequential amendments to those claims that are going to go to the Land Tribunal. The last clause before us, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is Clause 19. Clause 19 proposes an amendment to Section 25 of the Parent Act. Section 25 makes it an offense, and the offense was originally stated, any person who, having been served with a summons issued under the provisions of this Act, willfully neglects or refuses to attend in pursuance of such summons, or in respect of an order to produce any document which is required to produce, would have been guilty of an offense. What we did here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is we erred on the side of ultimate caution. You see, under the Summary Courts Act, you can have a summons to appear. You can also have a court order that you produce documentation. To avoid the risk of a tribunal other than a court of law, a full court of law, meaning the Supreme Court, either in the High Court Division or in the Court of Appeal Division, or even the Summary Court Division, we wanted to separate out the production of information aspects at this tribunal level, remove it entirely, so that the only offense that you could possibly be treated with is if you fail to appear without reasonable excuse. So if you willfully neglected to attend upon a summons to attend before the tribunal, that's where the offense would come in. We have completely removed any potential risk that you could run into an offense for failing to produce documentation, because we felt that that really ought to be a power which will reside elsewhere in the due process avenue, meaning in the courts of Trinidad and Tobago, not in the tribunal. Those, Mr. Deputy Speaker, are the amendments proposed for consideration in the round. It helps us to move to a better form of constitutionality. It certainly is proportional in all the circumstances, and I ask the honourable members of this House to support the proposed amendments, and I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses 4, 11, and 19 of the Land Adjudication Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017. I recognize the member for Kumuto, Manzelena.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It gives me great pleasure to bring brief comments on the Senate amendments to the Land Adjudication Amendment Number 2 Bill 2017, listed in the Appendix 2. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, I just want to briefly go back to a statement that the Honorable Attorney General made in his contribution in the Upper House, and it was that the Attorney General indicated the management of our land resource has been something which has been stuck in a time warp. And I just wonder, it would be remiss of me if I did not indicate that during the tenure of the PP government under our astute leader, Kamala Prasad-Visesa, the Honorable Prime Minister felt it was necessary to create the Ministry of Land and Marine Resources. And the reason why a ministry was set aside for land management was simply because of the fact that it's a very serious situation, it's a very personal issue, and it can be a very contentious issue. And so it was with this intention that the ministry was established. And so, but we have digressed, unfortunately, and it's not a problem. I will not go into anything negative because I want to say to the Attorney General that I read the very long Hansard, 499 pages, and I found that the tone of the Attorney General was extremely, extremely amenable. And I just want to congratulate the Attorney General. And I want to say why, because you see, a lot of amendments, the amendments that are before us, in fact, came from the opposition. And when I read through the Hansard, I saw that the Attorney General was very supportive of the amendments and very receptive. And it shows that, you know, when we work together, we can bring good law. We can pass good legislation. And I don't think that the government should ever be afraid of us voicing our opinions, because we represent the masses. We don't just represent the persons who voted for us. We represent the masses. And so as a result of it, I just want to congratulate again the Attorney General for being very amenable. And so I'm not going to keep this house very long. I'm not going to keep the house. I'm not going to keep this house very long. Just to say that, yes, congratulate all the members of the upper house who contributed. You know, and this approach, this entire process, shows that there is fairness and equity in how we come about the decision-making and putting good law on the table. Because transparency must be of the utmost and must be of paramount importance, as it involves a very tangible equity and one of pride, and that is land. And for those who are whose possession it is in, and therefore we must approach it with due diligence as it rightly deserves. You know, and when we look at the various amendments, you know, and Attorney Senator Gerald Ramdeen made the suggestion of removing the word recruited to appointed, and this would, of course, it brings more clarity and uniformity and a better approach to the entire process and how we speak it, so there's no misinterpretation, no ambiguity where the law is concerned. And so I just want to again indicate that as legislators, we are here to pass legislation that we deem is in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago, and that protects and guarantees the rights of people in Trinidad and Tobago. Again, I would like to thank the colleagues. I would like to thank the Attorney General. And with those few words, I would like to...
The Attorney General.
Thank you. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish to thank my learned colleague, the distinguished member for Kamuto Manzanilla, for her very kind sentiments and positive words, which are very well received in this House. I do want to say that what the honourable member has said is very true. There was very positive reflection in the Senate. Indeed, there are occasions when we all agree that we can absolutely do a great job in a conciliatory fashion. Regrettably, those may not be all of the occasions. We understand that there are positions which people take sometimes for other reasonable purposes, because there may be other voices in our society that one has to at least explore and represent. But these amendments are certainly amendments for which there is unanimous support, and I think that we are in a better place for it. Again, I thank my learned colleague, and I thank the honourable members of the Senate for their kind attention. I can say with certainty, as several of us in the House can, having served in the many different versions of Senates that sat. Indeed, the member for Aruka Maloney on our bench, the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, the member for St. Joseph, the member for Laventille West. Many of us, I myself, have served in the Senate. Our own member for Diego Martin West, the Honourable Prime Minister, as have many members opposite, Dr. Tiwari, Chaguanas East, etc. So the Senate is definitely a different house, which allows for a different pace of consideration and fulmination. and we are much the better off for our bicameral system for this form of reflection. In those circumstances, I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to clauses numbers 4, 11, and 19 of the Land Adjudication Amendment number 2 Bill 2017. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 29th day of June, 2018 at 1:30 p.m., at which time we will be continuing and concluding debate on committee business motion number 1. We will also be doing the Senate amendments to the Criminal Division and District Criminal and Traffic Courts Bill 2018. Thank you.
Honorable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to Friday, the 29th of June, 2018 at 1:30 p.m. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. In accordance with Standing Orders 11 and 12.1, this House now stands adjourned to Friday, 29 June, 2018 at 1:30 p.m.